Some people are born believing they're broken. They carry this belief like a heavy stone in their chest, letting it define every choice, every dream, every moment of possibility. But what happens when someone sees past the cracks to find the diamond underneath? What happens when love doesn't just accept our flaws, it transforms them into our greatest strengths? This is the story of a woman who spent 26 years hiding from mirrors, and the man who taught her that the heart she thought was fragile was actually unbreakable. It's about discovering that our deepest wounds can become our most powerful gifts, and that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never saw coming. In a world obsessed with perfect bodies and flawless lives, this is a reminder that real strength isn't about what we look like, it's about how we love, how we fight, and how we choose to see ourselves through someone else's eyes. Sarah Martinez had perfected the art of invisible living by the time she turned 26. Every morning began the same way, a careful dance around her reflection, eyes focused anywhere but the mirror as she brushed her teeth and combed her dark hair. The scar that ran from her left shoulder down to her elbow had faded to a pale pink line over the years, but, in her mind, it blazed like neon, announcing her difference to anyone who looked. The accident had happened when she was 12. A car crash that had left her mother with a broken wrist and Sarah with something far more lasting, a shattered arm that required 3 surgeries and months of physical therapy. The doctors had done their best, but her left arm remained noticeably smaller than her right, the muscle development stunted by the trauma. What should have been a normal teenage experience of growing into her body became a daily reminder of what made her different. Her closet told the story of 2 decades spent hiding. Long sleeves in summer, cardigans in spring, jackets that swallowed her whole frame. She had become an expert at sitting with her left side pressed against walls, at crossing her arms to minimize the difference, at making excuses to avoid swimming, dancing, or anything that might expose the truth she carried beneath carefully chosen fabric. Work was her sanctuary because it demanded nothing of her body, only her mind. As a graphic designer for a small marketing firm in downtown Phoenix, she could disappear into pixels and color schemes, creating beauty for other people's lives while carefully curating her own to remain unremarkable. Her colleagues knew her as the quiet one who always delivered exceptional work on time, who ate lunch at her desk while reading design blogs, who politely declined invitations to after-work drinks or company picnics. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday in October. Sarah was hunched over her computer, working on a logo design for a local restaurant, when her boss knocked on her cubicle wall. Margaret Chen was the kind of woman who wore confidence like expensive perfume, noticeable but never overwhelming. "Sarah, I need you to handle the Morrison account," Margaret said, setting a thick folder on her desk. "They're a construction company looking for a complete rebrand. The owner specifically requested someone who understands storytelling through design." Sarah's stomach tightened. The Morrison account was huge, the kind of project that could make her career. But it also meant client meetings, presentations, face-to-face interactions that she usually managed to avoid. "Are you sure I'm the right fit?" "Maybe Jennifer would be better, I'm sure," Margaret interrupted gently. "Sarah, you're incredibly talented. It's time you started believing that." That afternoon, Sarah found herself in the Morrison construction office, clutching her portfolio like a shield. The receptionist, a young woman with purple hair and multiple ear piercings, directed her to wait in the lobby. The walls were covered with photographs of construction sites, before and after shots of building renovations, and architectural blueprints. Everything spoke of transformation, of taking something broken and making it whole again. "Sarah Martinez?" The voice was warm, with just a hint of a southern accent. She looked up to see a man approaching, and her breath caught slightly. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it and wearing a blue work shirt with Morrison Construction embroidered above the pocket. But it was his eyes that stopped her, deep brown and genuinely kind, the kind of eyes that made you feel like he was really seeing you. "I'm David Morrison," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming out to meet with us." Sarah stood, instinctively positioning her body to keep her left side less visible. "Of course. I'm excited to learn more about your company." His handshake was firm but not crushing, and she noticed his hands bore the calluses and small scars of someone who worked with them. There was something reassuring about that evidence of honest work, of someone who built things instead of just talking about them. Let me give you a tour of the office, and then we can talk about what we're looking for, David said, gesturing toward a hallway lined with more construction photos. As they walked, he pointed out projects his company had completed over the past 15 years. A school renovation, several home additions, a complete overhaul of a community center. What struck Sarah wasn't just the quality of the work, but how David talked about each project, not in terms of profit margins or timelines, but in terms of the families who would live in those homes, the children who would learn in that school. This one's my favorite, he said, stopping in front of a photo showing a house that had clearly seen better days alongside its stunning transformation. The owner was a single mother with 2 kids. Her ex-husband had left the place in pretty bad shape, and she couldn't afford much. We worked something out where she traded some bookkeeping work for part of the labor cost. That's really generous, Sarah said, studying the before and after images. The transformation was remarkable, not just cosmetically, but you could sense the hope that had been built along with the new front porch and fresh paint. Business isn't just about money, David said simply. Sometimes it's about giving people a fresh start. They settled in his office, a practical space with a desk covered in blueprints and a coffee maker that looked like it had seen better days. David poured 2 cups without asking, somehow knowing she would want some. The coffee was strong and slightly bitter, but warming. So tell me about Morrison Construction, Sarah said, opening her portfolio. What story do you want to tell? For the next hour, David talked about his vision for the company. He had started Morrison Construction after working for other firms for several years, frustrated by their focus on cutting corners and maximizing profits. He wanted to build something different, a company that treated both clients and workers with respect, that took pride in craftsmanship, that understood construction wasn't just about putting up buildings but about creating spaces where life happened. Sarah found herself leaning forward, genuinely engaged in a way she rarely experienced during client meetings. David wasn't just talking about marketing, he was sharing his passion, his values, his dreams for what his business could become. The problem is, David continued, people see construction companies as all the same. They assume we're going to show up late, overcharge, cut corners. I need a brand that communicates something different: reliability, integrity, craftsmanship. But I don't want it to feel corporate or cold. Sarah nodded, her mind already spinning with possibilities. What if we focused on the transformation aspect? Not just the physical changes to buildings, but the way good construction work transforms lives? David's eyes lit up. Exactly. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd understand. They spent another 30 minutes discussing concepts, target audiences, and practical applications. Sarah forgot to be self-conscious, forgot to monitor her posture or worry about which side of her body was more visible. She was in her element, translating David's vision into visual possibilities. I'd like to propose 3 different concepts, she said finally, closing her portfolio. I'll need about a week to develop them properly. That sounds perfect, David said, standing. I have a good feeling about this collaboration. As Sarah gathered her things, she realized something had shifted during their meeting. For the first time in months, maybe years, she had felt completely present in a professional interaction. David had listened to her ideas not just politely, but with genuine interest and enthusiasm. He had asked follow-up questions that showed he understood not just what she was saying, but the creative process behind it. Sarah, David said as she reached the office door, I hope this doesn't sound presumptuous, but would you be interested in seeing one of our current job sites? I think it might give you a better sense of how we work, what sets us apart. Every instinct told her to decline. Job sites meant hard hats, safety vests, environments where her carefully constructed defenses would be useless. But something in David's expression, hopeful but not pushing, made her pause. When were you thinking? She heard herself ask. Tomorrow afternoon? It's a house renovation, and we're at an interesting stage where you can really see the transformation taking place. Sarah nodded before she could change her mind. Okay. What should I wear? Just comfortable clothes you don't mind getting a little dusty, and closed-toe shoes. We'll have a hard hat for you. That evening, Sarah stood in front of her closet longer than usual. Her typical armor of long sleeves and loose-fitting tops felt suddenly suffocating. Almost without thinking, she reached for a fitted t-shirt she had bought months ago but never worn, in navy blue with three-quarter-length sleeves that would still provide some coverage but were less concealing than her usual choices. She tried it on and immediately felt exposed. The shirt showed the actual shape of her body, including the slight asymmetry in her shoulders and arms. But, as she studied her reflection, really looked at herself instead of glancing away, she noticed other things too. The way the color brought out her dark eyes. The way the fit emphasized her small waist. The way she looked less like someone hiding and more like someone living. The next day, Sarah arrived at the job site address David had given her, a craftsman-style house in an older neighborhood that was clearly in the middle of gentrification. David's truck was parked in the driveway next to a dumpster filled with construction debris. The front yard was torn up from equipment traffic, but she could see the bones of something beautiful emerging. David appeared from around the side of the house, wearing jeans, work boots, and a t-shirt that had seen better days. Somehow, he looked even more attractive covered in sawdust than he had in his office clothes. When he spotted her, his face broke into a genuine smile. "You made it," he said, approaching with two hard hats. "Ready to see some magic happen?" As he placed the hard hat on her head, adjusting the strap with practiced efficiency, Sarah was acutely aware of how close he was standing. She could smell sawdust and something uniquely masculine, not cologne, just the clean scent of someone who worked hard for a living. "The owners are a young couple," David explained as they walked toward the house. "First-time buyers who got in over their heads with a fixer-upper. The previous owner had started several projects but never finished anything properly. The inside of the house was a revelation. What could have been overwhelming chaos was clearly organized progress." David walked her through each room, explaining what had been wrong and what they were doing to fix it. But, more than the technical details, Sarah was struck by his obvious pride in the work, his excitement about solving problems and creating something better. In the kitchen, he showed her how they had discovered original hardwood floors under layers of cheap vinyl, how they were restoring the built-in cabinets instead of replacing them, how they had rerouted plumbing to create better flow while preserving the home's character. "Most contractors would have just torn everything out and started over," David said, running his hand along the restored cabinet doors. "But, look at this craftsmanship. This is quality that doesn't exist anymore. It just needed someone to see its potential." Sarah found herself watching his hands as he spoke, noting the care with which he touched the restored wood, the obvious respect he had for the original builder's work. There was something deeply attractive about someone who could see value in things others might discard, who believed in restoration rather than replacement. "Come see the bathroom," David said, leading her down a narrow hallway. "This was the biggest disaster, but it's going to be incredible when we're finished." The bathroom was smaller than the other rooms, and, with both of them standing inside examining the new tile work, Sarah became hyper-aware of the space between them. When David reached past her to point out a detail in the shower installation, his arm brushed against hers, and she instinctively pulled back. "Sorry," she said quickly, though he hadn't complained. "No problem," David said, but something in his tone made her look at him. His expression was puzzled, not annoyed. "Are you okay?" Sarah realized she had been unconsciously positioning herself throughout the tour to keep her left side less visible, turning her body awkwardly, keeping her arm pressed close to her side. The careful choreography she had perfected was probably more noticeable than the thing she was trying to hide. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice sounded strained even to her own ears. David studied her face for a moment, and Sarah had the unsettling feeling that he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. But, instead of pushing, he simply nodded and continued the tour. By the time they finished walking through the house, Sarah felt like she had glimpsed something rare, not just David's professional skills, but his character. The way he spoke to his workers with respect, the obvious pride they took in their craftsmanship, the attention to detail that went far beyond what clients would ever notice. This wasn't just construction, it was creation. "So," David said as they returned their hard hats to his truck, "what do you think? Does this give you ideas for the branding?" "Absolutely," Sarah said, and she meant it. Her mind was already racing with concepts, before and after imagery, the idea of revealing hidden beauty, the metaphor of building something lasting. I think I understand what makes Morrison Construction different. I hope so, David said. Because I have a feeling you understand things that other designers might miss. As Sarah drove home that afternoon, she found herself thinking not just about logos and marketing materials, but about the way David had looked at that old house, seeing potential instead of problems, beauty instead of flaws, something worth saving instead of something worth discarding. For the first time in years, she wondered what it might feel like to be seen that way. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in Morrison Construction's conference room, surrounded by foam core boards displaying her 3 brand concepts. She had thrown herself into the project with an intensity that surprised even her, working late into the night, refining details that probably no one else would notice. Each concept told a different story about transformation, but they all carried the same underlying message that the best builders didn't just construct buildings, they revealed what was already there, waiting to be discovered. David studied each presentation with the same careful attention he had given to the restored cabinet doors at the job site. He asked thoughtful questions about font choices and color psychology, about how the brand would work across different applications. But what struck Sarah most was how he looked at her when she spoke, not politely waiting for his turn to talk, but genuinely listening, as if her words mattered. "This one," he said finally, pointing to the middle concept. "This captures exactly what I was trying to explain but couldn't put into words." The chosen design featured clean, modern typography paired with imagery that showed construction as an art form, close-ups of weathered hands working with tools, before and after shots that emphasized transformation rather than just renovation. The tagline Sarah had developed read "Building on what matters," a phrase that could apply equally to houses and relationships, structures and trust. "I love how you've made construction look elegant," David continued, studying the mock-ups of business cards and truck decals. "Most companies in this industry go for bold and aggressive. This feels confident without being pushy." Sarah felt a flush of professional pride. "I wanted people to feel like they were hiring an artist, not just a contractor." "That's exactly right," David said, then paused. "Sarah, I have to ask, would you be interested in handling our ongoing marketing needs? This is so much better than anything I could have hoped for, and I'd love to work with you on future projects." The offer should have thrilled her, but instead Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Ongoing work meant regular meetings, continued exposure, more opportunities for David to notice the things about herself she worked so hard to keep hidden. "I appreciate that," she said carefully, "but I should probably focus on my existing clients at the firm." Something flickered across David's expression, disappointment, maybe, or confusion. "Of course. I understand." But, as Sarah packed up her presentation materials, she realized she didn't want to walk away from this project, from working with someone who understood that business could be about more than just profit margins. More unsettling, she didn't want to walk away from David Morrison. "Actually," she said before she could overthink it, "maybe we could discuss a freelance arrangement for specific projects?" David's smile was worth the moment of vulnerability. "I'd like that very much." 2 days later, Sarah's phone rang just as she was finishing lunch at her desk. "Sarah? It's David Morrison. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all," she said, closing the design blog she had been reading. "What can I do for you?" "Well, I have an unusual request. One of my workers called in sick, and we're on a deadline to finish the kitchen at the house you visited. I know this is probably not your thing, but I don't suppose you'd be interested in earning some extra money doing very basic construction help? Just handing me tools and holding things steady while I work." Sarah's first instinct was to decline. Spending a day doing physical labor, in close quarters, with no way to carefully manage how she presented herself? It was everything she usually avoided. "You don't have to answer right now," David continued, seeming to sense her hesitation. "But the pay is good, and I promise the work isn't difficult. Mostly I just need an extra pair of hands." Sarah found herself staring at her computer screen, where she had been looking at the same logo design for the past hour, making tiny adjustments that probably weren't improvements. The thought of spending a day somewhere else, doing something completely different, was suddenly appealing. "What time?" she heard herself ask. 8 in the morning? And, Sarah, wear clothes you don't care about. This might get messy. That night, Sarah stood in front of her closet in a state of mild panic. Her usual strategy of careful concealment felt impossible for construction work, but the thought of being truly exposed terrified her. Finally, she settled on dark jeans and a long-sleeved t-shirt that was fitted enough to work in but loose enough to minimize the asymmetry in her arms. She arrived at the job site to find David's truck already there, along with a van she didn't recognize. David emerged from the house carrying a toolbox, looking pleased to see her. "You came," he said, as if he hadn't quite believed she would. "I'm here," Sarah replied, then added honestly, "though I should warn you I have zero construction experience." "That's fine. Enthusiasm matters more than experience." Inside the house, the transformation from her last visit was remarkable. The kitchen was nearly complete, with beautiful butcher block countertops and restored cabinets that gleamed with fresh stain. But there were still details to finish, cabinet hardware to install, final trim pieces to attach, outlets to wire. "Today's job is installing all the cabinet pulls and hinges," David explained, showing her boxes of brushed bronze hardware. "I'll do the measuring and drilling, but I need someone to hold cabinets steady and hand me the right screws." "Think you can handle that?" "I think I can manage," Sarah said, surprised to find herself looking forward to the work. For the first hour, they worked in comfortable efficiency. David would mark the placement of each pull, drill pilot holes, and Sarah would hand him the hardware and screws in the right order. It was satisfying work seeing each cabinet transformed from functional to beautiful with the addition of carefully chosen details. But, as the morning progressed, the work required more physical coordination. Sarah found herself having to reach across David to hold cabinet doors steady while he worked, their bodies necessarily close in the confined space. Several times, his hand brushed against hers as she handed him tools, and she became hyper-aware of every point of contact. It was while they were installing the pulls on the upper cabinets that everything changed. Sarah was standing on a step stool, holding a cabinet door open while David attached the hardware from inside. The angle was awkward, requiring her to stretch her left arm above her head and maintain the position while he worked. "Can you hold it just a little steadier?" David asked, focused on threading a screw. Sarah adjusted her grip, but the position was straining her left arm in a way that emphasized its limitations. After a few minutes, her arm began to shake slightly from the effort. "I'm sorry," she said, lowering her arm. "I need a quick break." "Of course," David said, stepping back. But, as Sarah climbed down from the step stool, she moved too quickly and caught her sleeve on the cabinet handle. The fabric tore, not badly, but enough to create a gap that exposed her left shoulder and the scar she had spent 26 years hiding. Time seemed to freeze. Sarah looked down at the tear in her shirt, at the pale pink line that was suddenly visible, and felt the familiar rush of shame and panic. Without thinking, she pressed her right hand over the exposed skin, but it was too late. David had seen. She waited for the reaction she had imagined 1,000 times, the awkward look away, the polite pretense that nothing had happened, the subtle shift in how he treated her. Instead, David stepped closer, his expression concerned but not shocked, not uncomfortable. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. "From the cabinet handle?" "No, I'm fine," Sarah said quickly, still covering the scar with her hand. "I should probably go home and change." "Sarah," David said gently, and something in his tone made her look at him. "You don't have to hide from me." The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. For 26 years, hiding had been her default response to everything: relationships, opportunities, experiences. The idea that she didn't have to, that someone could see her scars and not turn away, was so foreign she couldn't process it. "I know it's not pretty," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. David was quiet for a long moment, studying her face rather than the scar she was trying to cover. When he spoke, his voice was soft but certain. "Sarah, can I tell you something? I've been watching you for weeks now, trying to figure out why someone as talented and intelligent as you seems so determined to make yourself invisible. I've noticed how you sit, how you position yourself in meetings, how you wear clothes that are beautiful but seem designed to hide rather than reveal." Sarah felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the tear in her shirt. "David, I'm not finished," he said, not unkindly. What I see when I look at you isn't whatever you think is wrong with your body. I see someone who understands transformation in a way that goes beyond marketing concepts. I see someone who knows what it means to build something beautiful from something broken. I see someone with the strongest heart I've ever encountered. You don't understand, Sarah said, finally, lowering her hand from her shoulder. This isn't just a scar. My whole arm is different. Smaller. Weaker. I can't do things other people can do. David looked at the scar for the first time, really looked at it, and Sarah braced herself for the change in his expression. Instead, his face softened with something that looked like understanding. How old were you? He asked. 12. Car accident. David nodded slowly. That explains a lot. Not about your body, about your heart. Sarah, do you know what I do for a living? I take things that are broken and make them whole again. Not by hiding the places where they were damaged, but by building around them, making them stronger. He gestured toward the kitchen they had been working on. This house was a disaster when I started. Previous owners had tried to cover up problems instead of fixing them. Hidden water damage, electrical issues patched over rather than properly repaired. The only way to save it was to expose everything, see it clearly, and then build something better. Sarah followed his gesture, seeing the kitchen with new eyes. The restored cabinets still showed subtle signs of their age, slight variations in the wood grain, tiny imperfections that spoke of their history. But those flaws didn't detract from the beauty, they added character, authenticity, proof of survival. You think your scar makes you weak, David continued, but I've been watching you work. You're more careful than other people, more thoughtful. You understand things about restoration that someone who's never been broken couldn't grasp. Your scar isn't evidence of weakness, it's evidence of survival, of healing, of strength. Sarah felt tears threatening, a response she hadn't expected. But it's not just about how it looks. I actually can't do things, like what? Like help with construction projects, she said with a weak laugh. Sarah, you've been working for 4 hours without complaining. Your left arm might be different, but you've adapted in ways you probably don't even notice. You're more efficient with your right hand than most people are with both hands. You think through problems before acting instead of just using brute force. Those aren't limitations, they're skills. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah allowed herself to really consider what David was saying. She thought about her graphic design work, how her attention to detail and problem-solving abilities had earned her recognition at the firm. She thought about how she had approached David's branding project, understanding instinctively that the best marketing revealed authentic truth rather than creating false impressions. I've spent so much energy hiding, she admitted. I know, David said simply. The question is, what would you do with that energy if you weren't using it to hide? The question hung in the air between them, full of possibilities Sarah had never allowed herself to imagine. Around them, the kitchen waited for completion, a testament to the beauty that could emerge when someone saw potential instead of problems. Would you like to finish the cabinet pulls? David asked finally. Sarah looked at the boxes of hardware still waiting to be installed, at the half-completed project that would transform someone's daily experience of their home. She thought about walking away, going back to her cubicle and her carefully managed life. Then, she thought about David's words, about the difference between hiding and healing. Yes, she said, and, for the first time in years, the word felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. They worked for the rest of the afternoon, and something fundamental had shifted. Sarah stopped monitoring her posture, stopped positioning herself to hide her left side. When David handed her tools, she accepted them naturally. When she needed to stretch or reach, she did so without self-consciousness. More importantly, they talked. David told her about starting his construction company, about the satisfaction of solving problems with his hands, about the pride he felt in creating spaces where families would build memories. Sarah found herself sharing stories about her design work, about the satisfaction of translating abstract concepts into visual reality, about the clients whose businesses had grown after she helped them tell their stories more effectively. As the afternoon sunlight slanted through the kitchen windows, illuminating sawdust motes in the air and casting golden light on their completed work, Sarah realized she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, completely present in her own life, unguarded and unafraid. "We make a good team," David said as they packed up the tools. Sarah looked around the transformed kitchen, at the evidence of their collaboration, and smiled. "Yes, we do." That evening, Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror and did something she hadn't done since she was 12 years old. She really looked at herself. Not glancing away, not focusing on other features to avoid seeing her scar, but actually examining the woman looking back at her. She saw dark eyes that were intelligent and kind, hair that fell in soft waves around her face, a mouth that was more generous than she had realized. She saw the scar that ran from her shoulder down her arm, faded now to a thin pink line that told a story of survival rather than defeat. And, for the first time in 26 years, when Sarah Martinez looked in the mirror, she didn't see someone broken. She saw someone who had been cracked open and was finally ready to let the light shine through. 6 months after the day her shirt tore in David's kitchen, Sarah Martinez stood in front of her closet and reached for a sleeveless dress. The action was deliberate, conscious, and would have been unthinkable a year ago. But today was special. Morrison Construction was hosting an open house for their latest project, and Sarah had been instrumental in designing not just the marketing materials but also in consulting on the interior design elements. The dress was emerald green, fitted through the bodice and flowing softly to just below her knees. It was beautiful, sophisticated, and completely unlike anything she had worn in public since she was 12 years old. As she slipped it on, Sarah caught her reflection in her bedroom mirror and paused. The scar was visible, a pale pink line that traced from her shoulder down her left arm, which remained noticeably smaller than her right. But what struck her wasn't the imperfection she had hidden for so long. It was the confidence in her posture, the brightness in her eyes, the way she carried herself like someone who belonged in beautiful spaces rather than someone who hid from them. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. After that afternoon in the kitchen, David had continued to ask for her help with various projects, sometimes for marketing and design work, but increasingly just because he valued her perspective. Sarah discovered she had an intuitive understanding of how spaces should feel, how light and color and texture could work together to create environments where people wanted to spend time. More importantly, she had discovered that David Morrison was exactly who he appeared to be, someone who saw potential instead of problems, who built people up the same way he restored houses, with patience and skill and unwavering belief in the possibility of something beautiful emerging from something broken. Their relationship had developed gradually, like the careful process of renovation itself. Shared coffee during planning meetings had turned into shared lunches on job sites. Professional conversations had evolved to include personal stories, dreams, fears they had never articulated to anyone else. The first time David had reached for her hand, sitting in his truck after a long day of work, Sarah hadn't pulled away. Instead, she had marveled at how perfectly her fingers fit between his, how natural it felt to be touched without having to hide. The open house was being held at the Craftsman House where Sarah had first worked alongside David, the project that had been completed 3 months earlier. The young couple who owned it, Emma and Jake Chen, had become friends during the renovation process, often stopping by after work to check on progress and learn about what was being done. They had been thrilled when David suggested making their home the centerpiece of Morrison Construction's first annual open house, a marketing event designed to showcase the company's philosophy of thoughtful restoration. Sarah arrived at the house just as the catering van was pulling up, its side panels decorated with the Morrison Construction logo she had designed. The familiar sight gave her a surge of professional pride, but it was seeing David emerge from the house that made her heart quicken. He was wearing dark slacks and a crisp white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms and the same calloused hands that could install cabinet hardware with precision and touch her face with infinite gentleness. When he spotted her walking up the front path, his face transformed with the kind of smile that made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "Sarah," he said, meeting her halfway and taking both her hands in his. "You look absolutely stunning." "Thank you," she replied, and meant it in a way she never had before. "The house looks incredible." The transformation was indeed remarkable. What had been a neglected, problem-filled structure was now a showcase of thoughtful renovation. The exterior had been painted in soft sage green with white trim, the front porch restored to its original craftsman glory. Flower boxes overflowed with seasonal blooms, and warm light glowed from restored window fixtures. "Come see the inside before guests arrive," David said, leading her up the front steps. "Emma and Jake have been decorating all week." The interior was breathtaking. The kitchen they had worked on together was now fully finished and staged with fresh flowers and artfully arranged dishes. The hardwood floors gleamed, the restored cabinets displayed carefully chosen ceramics and glassware, and afternoon sunlight streamed through windows that had been stripped and refinished to their original beauty. But it was more than just the physical improvements. The house felt alive, inhabited, loved. Personal touches throughout spoke of the young family who lived there, children's drawings held by magnets on the refrigerator, books stacked on restored built-in shelves, family photos in frames that complemented the home's craftsman aesthetic. "This is what it's all about," David said softly, watching Sarah take in the transformation. "Not just fixing what's broken, but creating spaces where real life happens." Emma Chen appeared from the living room, wearing a floral dress and carrying a toddler who had clearly just woken up from a nap. "Sarah, I'm so glad you could make it. David told us you were instrumental in helping with the design elements." "It was a team effort," Sarah said, accepting a hug from Emma while smiling at the sleepy toddler. "But you and Jake made it into a real home. Can I show you my favorite part?" Emma asked, shifting her daughter to her other hip. "The reading nook in the master bedroom. David built it based on your suggestion about creating intimate spaces within larger rooms." They spent the next 30 minutes walking through the house, with Emma and Jake pointing out details that made their home special. The window seat with built-in storage that provided the perfect spot for morning coffee. The mudroom that David had created by enclosing a portion of the back porch. The bathroom where original tile had been painstakingly restored and supplemented with period-appropriate additions that looked like they had always been there. But what moved Sarah most were the stories behind each improvement. How Emma had cried when they discovered original hardwood under layers of cheap vinyl. How Jake had learned to use a tile saw so he could help with the bathroom renovation. How their 2-year-old daughter had helped by carrying very small tools and being the official inspector of all completed work. "David didn't just renovate our house," Emma said as they stood in the living room, surrounded by the evidence of thoughtful restoration. "He helped us create our dream home while respecting everything that was already beautiful about the original structure." As guests began to arrive for the open house, Sarah found herself in an unfamiliar but pleasant role, part hostess, part design consultant, part storyteller, helping to explain the Morrison construction philosophy to potential clients. People asked about her background, about how she had transitioned from graphic design to interior consultation, about her vision for combining marketing expertise with hands-on renovation experience. For the first time in her professional life, Sarah talked about her work without minimizing her contributions or deflecting credit to others. She explained how understanding both the visual and practical aspects of renovation had made her a better designer, how working with her hands had enhanced her ability to create marketing materials that authentically reflected what Morrison Construction actually delivered. When a middle-aged woman asked about the challenges of working in a traditionally male field, Sarah surprised herself by speaking honestly about adaptation and strength rather than limitations and accommodation. "I think everyone brings different skills to construction work," she said. "I might approach problems differently than someone else, but different perspectives usually lead to better solutions." The woman nodded thoughtfully. "And David Morrison? What's he like to work with?" Sarah glanced across the room to where David was explaining restoration techniques to a small group, his passion for craftsmanship evident in every gesture. "He's someone who sees potential where others see problems," she said simply. "He makes everyone around him better at what they do." As the evening progressed, Sarah realized she was genuinely enjoying herself. She was meeting new people, sharing ideas about design and renovation, engaging in the kind of professional and social interaction she had avoided for years. More importantly, she was doing it all as herself, not as a carefully constructed version designed to hide her flaws, but as Sarah Martinez, complete with scars and asymmetries and all the strength that came from having survived and thrived. The evening's highlight came when David asked for everyone's attention and formally introduced Sarah as Morrison Construction's new design consultant and partner in their expanding interior restoration services. The applause was warm and genuine, but what mattered most was the pride in David's eyes as he looked at her, the sense of belonging she felt standing beside him in the house they had helped transform together. After the last guests had left and the catering staff had packed up, Sarah and David sat on the front porch swing that had been original to the house but fully restored as part of the renovation. Emma and Jake had gone inside to put their daughter to bed, leaving David and Sarah alone in the soft evening air. "Successful first open house," Sarah said, leaning against David's shoulder. "I think you're going to get a lot of new clients from tonight." "We're going to get new clients," David corrected gently. "This is your success too." Sarah smiled, thinking about how natural it had felt to be introduced as his business partner, how right it seemed to be building something together that was bigger than either of them could create alone. "I never imagined I'd be running a business with someone." "What did you imagine?" David asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Honestly? For most of my life, I imagined staying invisible. Safe. Hidden." Sarah paused, looking out at the neighborhood street where other craftsman houses stood in various states of preservation and neglect. "I thought my scars meant I was broken. I thought being different meant being less than. And now?" Sarah turned to look at David, this man who had seen through her defenses to something she hadn't even known was there. "Now I think my scars are part of what makes me good at this work. I understand what it means to need restoration. I know the difference between covering up damage and actually healing it." David cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing along her cheekbone. "Sarah Martinez, you are the strongest person I've ever met. Not despite your scars, but because of everything you've built from them." As they sat together on that restored porch, surrounded by the evidence of what could be created when someone believed in transformation rather than concealment, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a 12-year-old girl who learned to hide from mirrors to a woman who had found her reflection in someone else's eyes and, finally, learned to like what she saw. The house around them stood as testimony to a simple but powerful truth that the most beautiful things weren't perfect, but rather they were authentic, showing signs of their history while embracing the possibility of their future. Broken things could be made whole not by hiding the cracks, but by filling them with something stronger than the original material. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the backyard of her own house, a 1920s bungalow that she and David had bought together, planning their first joint renovation project. The structure needed work, the foundation was sound, but everything else required attention, from updated electrical to restored hardwood floors to a kitchen that hadn't been touched since the 1980s. But Sarah no longer looked at problems and saw insurmountable obstacles. Instead, she saw opportunities for transformation, chances to reveal hidden beauty, possibilities for creating something wonderful from something that had been neglected. "What do you think?" David asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Ready to renovate our first house together?" Sarah leaned back against his chest, looking at the house that would become their home. It was imperfect, weathered, showing its age in ways that would require patience and skill to address. In other words, it was exactly like everything else worth saving. "I'm ready," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "Let's build something beautiful." As David kissed her in the late afternoon sunlight, Sarah marveled at how far she had traveled from the woman who once hid from her own reflection. She had learned that strength wasn't about having an unblemished surface, but about what you chose to build after life had marked you. She had discovered that the best foundations weren't the ones that never cracked, but the ones that were carefully repaired and reinforced when they did. Most importantly, she had found someone who understood that restoration was an act of love, not changing something into what you thought it should be, but helping it become the best version of what it already was. In David's eyes, Sarah Martinez had finally found a mirror that showed her the truth. She wasn't broken and waiting to be fixed. She was strong, beautiful, and exactly where she belonged, not hiding from the light, but building something wonderful right in the middle of it.